All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome back to Columbia College. It's a beautiful day out there, which I wasn't ready for, but that's nice. It's kind of been, the last month has been pretty gray, I think, hey? Like pretty rainy, pretty gray. So I don't remember a lot of sunny days, but it's nice that it's sunny today. I'm going to enjoy that. How's the weekend? Okay. Do anything fun? Yes? Can you tell me about it? Or is it illegal?
No.
It's not illegal? Okay, good.
Not always.
Okay, good. Good.
I
What?
went out with my friends.
Okay. Yeah.
Just because I got there, I invited them.
Right. Fun.
Yes.
Good. 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 Anything else? You guys. You're either having like no fun at all, or you're having like so much fun that like you can't even tell me about it because it's like that level of fun.
With ton of homeworks.
What's that?
Very fun. Tons of homework.
Ton already? Week one? I'm being too easy on you guys.
I always have to talk.
Too easy. Okay. Let's start here. Hang on. Right. Right. That's where we were. So we were talking about culture on Friday. We were talking about human culture, and we said that there were kind of a few characteristics we should be aware of. That culture is a series of symbols. So humans are always communicating with each other in a good morning, in a symbolic fashion, right? Sometimes with words, sometimes with gestures, sometimes with artwork or music or any of those things, right? We're constantly communicating, encoding symbols for other people, and other people are decoding those symbols, right? We said that culture was learned. So all of us went through a process of enculturation in which we learned our culture, right? The values and norms and beliefs of our society and the skills that we need to survive. We talked about culture being integrated, and so all the different parts of culture kind of work together like a machine to meet the needs of people, right? And when one part of that machine is changed or modified, other parts have to respond. And it's probably worth saying that that's usually the case in cultures all the time. Like culture is constantly kind of evolving and changing. Although I think it might be fair to say that, over the past 30 or 40 or 50 years, maybe even more, culture change has become more and more rapid, right? It's become more and more quick. But it's always been the case. Cultures are not written in stone. They're not static. They evolve and change as the environment changes. And finally, we said culture was shared, right? So you can't just study culture, and look at it and take notes, because culture is a abstract concept, right? And so you have to watch how people interact with each other and the things that they do, and then kind of work out and build a picture of the culture from there, right? Yes, that's where we left off. We were talking about human sacrifice, and then I left you with this ugly, gory image for the weekend. So, right, we were talking about looking at cultures different than our own, and actually we were talking about this in social justice just 20 minutes ago, which is strange and interesting, but it's the same thing. And so we were talking about this particular culture here from the 14th to the 16th century in Mexico, called the Aztecs. And the Aztecs, we said, were kind of new arrivals to the area. They had wandered around for quite some time until they settled in a place where their god gave them an omen. And they managed to build a massive city on a lake. And so they built this city called Tenochtitlan, and they built it to look something like this. Again, it's been destroyed now. The conquistadors who came to the New World, Hernando Cortez here, he destroyed the Aztec city, and built Mexico City on top of it. And so the original city is long gone. But of course, in Mexico City, when they dig a new sewer line or something like that, often they find Aztec artifacts because, again, they're sitting right on top of this ancient city. So it was very kind of technologically advanced and very impressive and beautiful. There's a big aqueduct here bringing fresh water in from the mountains. The Aztecs grew all of their own food, and they built all of these stone structures on their lake city, which is, again, pretty impressive, I think. And so we did a little imagination where we went back in time and we walked around this Aztec city, maybe in the year 1400, so maybe 600 years ago or so, and we probably thought it was quite beautiful, and there's lots of people running around and kids going to school and people selling and trading things in the market. And then we approached the main temple in the center of the city, and I described a ritual in which a human being had their heart removed while they were still alive and presented to the sun god, right? And so, what's that? Yeah, they were sacrificed to the god. And so I showed you this, an actual Aztec drawing where, yeah, you can pretty clearly see what's happening. There's a priest cutting a guy's heart out. His heart is going to the sun god. And then there's a previous sacrifice here at the bottom of the temple, and he gets taken away to maybe be eaten or to be cut up, and parts of him sent to people the warrior wanted to impress, right? And the question I asked you, of course, is like, okay, well, what's your reaction to something like this, right? That's quite a thing to see, right? What's your reaction? It's cool. I think it's cool to hear about. I don't know how cool it would be to see. Or to experience. It sounds incredibly painful. Of course, not for long, but it's a short experience. But it's probably incredibly painful for the person that goes through it. It's probably quite extreme. I don't think the people who were sacrificed necessarily wanted to be sacrificed. So there's that. It's pretty bloody, right? Most of us have never seen anyone cut open before, or at least I hope not. And, this person's heart is removed, right? So we would probably feel a mixture of kind of shock, terror, probably a little bit of disgust. People might throw up. I think that would be a reasonable reaction to that. People might be frightened, right? You might be pretty weird or pretty concerned that maybe that would happen to you next. So you're like, I'm out of here, kind of thing. It might be a pretty scary thing to go through. Wouldn't you say? I think I would. I would definitely I'd be freaked out. So here's the thing. Here's I asked you that question. Here's the terms I want to present to you here. One is ethnocentrism, and one is cultural relativism. And ethnocentrism is just this, the practice of judging other cultures from the perspective of your own, right? And so from our own perspective, we could probably judge the Aztec sacrifice as brutal, right? People might describe it as brutal or barbaric or cruel or senseless or needlessly violent or awful. All of these things would be, I think, reasonable ways to describe this from our point of view. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, there's cultural relativism. So the idea that we will suspend our judgment and instead try to understand cultures on their own terms, right? So instead of asking, let's say with this Aztec sacrifice, instead of saying, is this wrong? Is this a horrible thing to do? And judging it according to our own values, we say, well, okay, is this a horrible thing to do from the Aztec perspective? Why are they doing this thing? And how does it make sense for them, and how does it fit in with their culture? So let me give you a little bit of cultural background. So for the Aztec, in the Aztec kind of myth and religion, what happens is that the sun god kind of moves his way across the sky every day, right? And at night, he descends below the horizon. And when he does, he descends into the underworld. And the underworld is full of all kinds of monsters and creatures and terrifying things that will actually try to kill the sun god. So the sun god has to like fight his way through the underworld every night to emerge the next morning. Okay, so that's the myth of and the idea of how things work for the Aztecs. The other thing that's important to know is that the Aztecs felt that human blood and human life was, and it might sound strange to say this now, but human blood and human life was in fact sacred. And so it was actually food for the gods. Human blood was the food that the gods ate. That's what flows through people's veins. And so if you were to kill someone, or if someone was to die, it should be, in sacrifice to the god, in feeding the god. And so these rituals are about, offering blood to the sun god so that he will be strong, right? So that he will be strong enough to make his journey through the underworld and fight all of these terrifying monsters and rise the next morning. Because of course, if the sun doesn't come up tomorrow morning, we've got big problems, right? Yeah, we've got really big problems if the sun does not come up tomorrow. And the Aztecs felt that way as well. But for the Aztecs, they felt that they actually had a way to assist the god, to directly help the god, right? Which is pretty interesting as well, because I don't know all of your spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs, but we don't often get a chance to actually help out the god, right? Usually we're like, please God, help me with this thing, right? That's usually what we're doing. We're asking him for help. We're not actually in the position to help him. But in the Aztec kind of cosmology and religious belief, they were actually in the position to help the sun god defeat all these creatures and rise the next day. And so because of that, they were sacrificing these people. And so when they went to war with a neighboring tribe, they tried not to kill anyone. They tried to capture them and bring them back, because if they were going to die, they should be offered to the god. They shouldn't be just killed in war for no reason. And so what's interesting is that when the Spanish came, so when the Spanish came, I'm missing a slide here too for some reason. When the Spanish came, the Aztecs were actually appalled with the violence that the Spanish used, because the Spanish conquistadors would come and they would shoot a bunch of people and take their gold and just leave these people dead on the ground. And the Aztecs were looking at this and they thought, what a horrible waste of human life to just kill all these people and just take their stuff. Like, this is awful. This is an awful thing to do. And the Spanish, of course, came to the Aztec city and watched the sacrifice that we heard about and said, wow, these people are horrible. They have no respect for human life. How could they just kill people for no reason at all, right? And so, interestingly, both groups were kind of being a little bit ethnocentric about the other. But what's interesting, of course, is that they actually shared a few core beliefs, right? If you ask the Aztecs, they would say, yes, human life is sacred. It belongs to the gods. And if you ask the Spanish, who were Christian or Catholic, they would tell you the same thing. Yes, human life is sacred. It was created by God, right? So interestingly, they had the same value, but they had different ideas about when people were allowed to be killed, right? Who is allowed to be killed and when and for what purpose, right? Those rules differed, but they had that same value. And yeah, and they did agree that, it was possible to kill other people for certain reasons. And for the Spanish, it was you were allowed to kill people who weren't Spanish and who had something you wanted, and you wanted it more. Like, that was apparently okay. For the Aztecs, it was like, yes, people can be killed in sacrifice to the sun god. That's when people can be killed. And they probably shared beliefs about honoring the gods as well, right? The gods should be honored, the gods should be obeyed, right? I think that the Spanish obeyed their gods and the Aztecs obeyed theirs. And so it's kind of strange. These two groups were coming into conflict and probably thought awful things about the other one, but really they were sharing a lot of beliefs, right? They were just practicing them in different ways, which is kind of interesting, hey? So, do I have one more slide on this? Yeah. So in being ethnocentric, it kind of kept them from being able to understand the culture of the other one, right? And to see the places that they actually had some overlap, right? In their honoring of the gods and their belief in the sanctity of human life. And so when we study other cultures, we want to not be ethnocentric, we want to be culturally relativistic, right? We want to try and understand a human culture from the perspective of that culture, right? Is this killing of people in Aztec society, is this a bad thing? Well, actually not, right? Not according to the Aztecs. This was a religious sacrifice to honor and to support the sun god. And in some cases, most of the people who were sacrificed were captives, right? They were captured in war. But some Aztecs were sacrificed as well. And from what I know, which is not a huge amount, but from what I know, it was actually a huge honor, right? To be able to directly assist the god in his activities. I mean, again, who among us gets to do that, right? Who among us gets to help a god, right? And so, again, we want to understand things from the inside, right? From the perspective of that culture. Now, it doesn't mean that anything goes, right? If a culture believes something, then it must be right. That's not the case either. But for the studying of cultures, we usually want to be more culturally relativistic. And if there's more tricky instances, we'll get to those later. Right. Okay. Oh, this is gonna be fun too. Before I go on, I'm just going to say good morning to some people because I forgot to earlier. So Amanpreet is here. Good morning to you. And Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil. Noah's here. Good morning, Noah. Michelle is here. Good morning, Michelle. Adon is here. Good morning. And Sarah is here. Good morning, Sarah. Okay. A little bit of background. So before we get to human culture, as we kind of know it, I want to just give you a little bit of background as to where we start off, where human culture begins. Also, you can thank me. There was in this slideshow here, I also had a bunch of things I wanted to talk about in terms of anthropological theories, but I cut it out because it was too much. So you're welcome. You wouldn't have enjoyed it, I promise. So I've cut those out this time, and it's a little more streamlined. Right. So the question here is, of course, no other animal has culture, so where does culture actually come from? Why do we have culture and no other animals really do? Well, it's a long story, and I'm going to try and make it short. And the reason I'll try and make it short is because it's kind of beyond the scope of this course. Also, it's very interesting, and I could spend a lot longer talking about it. So what we're talking about here is our evolutionary family tree. And so we're going back a few million years to look at the creatures that came before us and see kind of what they were like. Things we should remember when I tell you this story is that, number one, there's no clear consensus on our evolutionary history, okay? So when we look back, we have an incomplete fossil record, and so we're looking at millions of years, and we don't have that many specimens from that length of time. So the story is still emerging. We're still figuring it out. And a lot of what we know is based on incomplete remains. So it's not an entire skeleton of a creature, it's bits and pieces of one. And so it's very difficult to piece together what these animals looked like and how they moved and what they ate and how they might have behaved. But that's what paleoanthropologists do. They try to figure these things out. So I'll show you this family tree here, and I'm not sure, I guess you can see it. The story probably, well, the story could start anywhere you want, but for us the story probably starts with hominids, which are apes, which are human-like apes that walk on 2 feet. And that probably starts maybe around 5 or maybe as early as 6 million years ago. So the very first things, primate, apey things that were walking on 2 feet probably started around 5 million years ago. But they didn't look anything like us, really. They didn't have anywhere near our intellectual capacity. They were very much just apes that happened to be walking around on 2 feet. Let me just see. Give me just 1 second. I just want to look ahead and make sure I know. I think I know where I'm going here. I just want to make sure. I just want to look ahead at a few of my slides. Okay. Yep. Right. Right. Okay. Oh, and this is, okay. Right. So there's a bunch of species here on this family tree, on this phylogeny. We absolutely will not talk about all of them. In my anthro course, I would talk about more of them, but I won't here. But as you can see, there's a few things I want to point out here. Number one, there's about a 5 million year history of bipedal primates on planet Earth, okay? And so our ability to do that goes back a long way. Second, there are different lines of animals or different species, and some of them may have been our ancestors and some of them probably not, okay? And the third thing I want to point out, which is very interesting to think about, is that if you look back, almost always there are more than one bipedal primate running around, right? So now we kind of live in a world that we kind of think, oh, this is normal, right? We're the only one. But actually that's not normal, right? The normal state would have been, yeah, there's us, but there's also other species of bipedal primate running around, which if you think about it, would be weird, would it not? Other things out there that are kind of like us humans, but also not. That'd be very strange. And as you can see here, the last other species to share the planet with us have really only been gone for 30 or 40,000 years, which in terms of this time scale is nothing, right? So again, we're very used to a planet where, you know, ain't no thing like me except me, right? But there is a precedent in the past for other types of humans running around at the same time, which I think would be really quite strange. We'll start here. You don't need to know the name of this creature, but this is an Ardipithecus ramidus. And Ardipithecus is about 4.5 million years ago, and probably one of the first primates that walked on 2 feet. And so you can see this is kind of a muscle chart of what it might have looked like. You can see it looks quite ape-like, right? There's an ape face. It's got some ape features like really long arms. Look how long those arms are, right down to their knees. Really long arms, short legs, kind of a long body, really long fingers, which are good for swinging through the trees. And if you look at their foot, that's a weird looking foot too, right? Because they've got their big toe can actually grab onto branches. So not a human looking foot, right? More of an ape-like foot. But again, this creature had the anatomy that allowed it to walk on 2 feet on the ground. Not as well as we do, certainly not run like we do, but this thing walked, right? We have later evidence of hominids walking around. This is a museum exhibit, but it's a museum exhibit that describes a place in East Africa called Laetoli. And in that place, about 3 million years ago, 2 hominids, these are Australopithecus afarensis, if you will, they were walking and a volcano had erupted and had deposited a bunch of volcanic ash on the ground. And these hominids walked across it. And then, it lightly rained and the ash kind of solidified into like a cement and it was preserved. So we actually have this piece of rock with these hominid footprints in them from 3 million years ago. And as you can see from the footprints, they're not using a stick, they're not using their hands, they are simply walking on 2 feet, just like we do. And they might have looked like this. They might have looked like these strange, funny little creatures. Also, they were quite short. They were probably only about this big. So there's kind of a large cast of characters here that we won't get into. These are kind of fun to look at because they're a little bit science and a little bit art, right? So we have the skulls of these animals and we kind of know how primate musculature is. We know where it attaches and kind of how it works. But we don't really know what these creatures looked like. And so again, there's a bit of science and a bit of art happening here. But it is kind of interesting to look at these faces and imagine these creatures running around and being ancestors of us, right? Being early versions of ourselves. One of the ones I want to pay attention to is this one here, is Homo habilis. And so Homo habilis is an important species for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the first one of our genus, right? So scientific species names always have 2 parts, right? So what are we? We're Homo sapiens, right? We're the wise man, right? Is what that kind of translates to from Latin, I believe. We're Homo sapiens. These guys are Homo habilis, and they're the first member of our genus. They're the first member of the genus Homo. So they've got a bigger brain than a lot of things that come before. They do walk on 2 feet. This is not a super smart animal in terms of how we imagine smart animals, but it's probably one of the smartest animals on the planet around 3 million years ago. And one of the things I want to point out to you is this: the world's first piece of technology. You don't look very impressed. Why not? You knew it. You knew it? Okay. Even if you knew it, even if you didn't know it, it's not a very impressive piece of technology, is it? It looks like a rock, doesn't it? It's a broken rock. Not impressive at all. That's exactly what it is. It is a broken rock. And Homo habilis actually makes this type of tool for quite some time, right? For probably about 1 million years, Homo habilises are running around Africa making stone tools like this. And it's a very simple tool to make. All you have to do is you have to take one stone, and then you take another stone, and you hit it in the right spot, and you knock 2 or 3 pieces off the end, and you get kind of a sharp edge along the bottom. Okay? It's very simple to make. So one of the questions you might ask is, well, why is this a big deal in terms of manufacturing? Okay? And it's a big deal for a couple of reasons. So number one, in order to make a good tool, you need a certain type of rock. Okay? So not every rock is going to break really well, and not every rock is going to break in a way that gives you a nice sharp edge. And so we know what granite is, right? Yeah, so if you imagine granite in your mind, and if you look closely at it, it's made up of all sorts of little parts, right? There's all sorts of little different crystals and bits mixed in with it. And so granite doesn't really break in a way that's good for stone tools because it's chunky and it's going to break along those chunks, and you're just not going to get a sharp edge. You need something that has a very uniform texture, a very smooth texture inside. And Homo habilis knew this, and so you can go around and you can knock rocks together. And a lot of them sound dull. They sound like rocks that are knocking together. But the good ones kind of ring a little bit. They kind of go bong, 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 because they have a really uniform structure inside. And so when you break those, they don't break along the grains and the crystals. They break nice and smooth. And so they're sharp, right? So Homo habilis not only knows how to knock these pieces off the rock, but they actually know the right type of rock to find. They know that not every rock is going to work, and they've got to check and find the right rock. Now, one of the questions is, of course, is what do you think they were doing with a tool like this? Hunting? Hunting? Do you think you could defend yourself with this? Against maybe like a large cave bear or lion? Probably not. Yeah. This is what's kind of interesting about this stage in history is because people assume that our ancestors were hunting. And they were, but not 3 million years ago. Not even 2 million years ago. Not even 1 million years ago. So these animals are pre-hunting. They haven't invented spears yet. They don't know how to use fire. They haven't invented anything yet. So this is the only thing that they've got. And so what some anthropologists suggest they might have been using it for is for scavenging. So not for hunting, but for getting meat from animals that bigger animals have already killed, right? And so if you imagine a lion kill, okay? So this is 3 million years ago, let's say, and if you're a little Homo habilis, keep in mind you're like this tall, okay? You're just a little furry Homo habilis, and you've got your little tool. You're not going to be able to kill an animal. You're not going to be able to kill an antelope or anything like that. The lions can kill it, but you have to wait until the lions are done, right? And when the lions are finished, that's what's left, right? Look at this poor jackal's like, it's all gone. There's nothing left, right? So if you've got to wait for the lions to leave and then you're a little Homo habilis, what's left for you? Almost nothing, right? The lions have eaten all the muscles and all the organs, and they've stripped the bones clean, and certainly this little jackal will get in there and maybe get a little bite of meat or something. What is a poor Homo habilis to do, right? But you'll notice that the head is intact. Because for the most part, lions either their mouths aren't big enough or they just can't crack open a skull. And so often the only thing left here is the brain. So the lions can't get in there. The little jackals and things, they can't get in there either. But along comes little Homo habilis with his tool or her tool. Can break it open, and then you've got brain to eat, which is disgusting, granted, but this is a game changer for Homo habilis, because now Homo habilis has access to a food source that nobody else has access to. What normally eats the brain, do you think, in an animal like this? Yeah, like bugs, right? Bugs, insects, worms, maggots, whatever. They will eat the brain because they're the only ones who can get in there. But Homo habilis, with his little tool, can come along and get access to this food source that nobody else has access to. And that's a huge evolutionary advantage, right? Whenever you're a species that can access food that no one else can get to, Huge advantage, right? And here, Homo habilis has developed this little tool. What's also interesting is that brain tissue is full of omega-3 fatty acids. Have you heard of omega-3s? No. Yeah? What's the deal with omega-3s, Sophie? They're good for your eyes? Okay. They're good for all sorts of things, right? They're an essential fatty acid, I believe. So they're a type of fat that your body actually needs to survive. And it's very good for your brain tissue because a lot of what your brain tissue is built of is fatty acids, omega-3s. That's your brain there's a lot of fat up there. And so your brain is built from these omega-3 fatty acids. And here comes this little hominid who now has access to all of these omega-3 fatty acids. Do you think that was good for the development of their brains? Probably. Do you think that it was good for their survival to have access to this new food source? Absolutely. And probably more importantly, I said these tools were made for, Homo habilis makes these tools for 1 million years. And they all look more or less the same, which is incredible, right? Because that means that they are passing that knowledge down, right? That's repeated pattern behavior that is passed on from one generation to the next for 1 million years, right? So this is kind of like the first seed of what culture will become, right? This passing on knowledge, passing on skills, passing on behaviors, generation after generation. And again, there's no beliefs or values here. There's no abstract concepts. There's no language, right? These creatures are very primitive as compared to us, but they're doing the same things that we do, right? They're teaching their kids how to do this. They're teaching their kids how to make tools and how to survive. And so Homo habilis is kind of the very beginning of that process, the very beginning of what culture will become. Cool, right? Millions of years ago. These funny little apes running around. Yeah, so we can imagine these kind of creatures, out there on sort of the African plains, attempting to survive, trying not to get eaten, collecting food, and sometimes scavenging animals that have been killed by others. So a couple of major developments over this entire period, this 3 or 4 or 5 million year period. One, bipedalism was incredibly important for us. Walking on 2 feet made everything else possible about what we do, right? It allows us to use our hands for things, right? We don't have to use them to walk around. Instead, we can use them to build tools and manipulate objects, right? Our brains are unique in their structure and their development. We don't have a lot of time to go into this, but human brains have kind of the same basic parts as many other mammalian brains, but they have far more neurons, and those neurons are interconnected in many, many more ways than in any other animal. And that, again, comes about through a process of evolution. Humans develop a strong attachment system. And so we attach to other humans, right? First our parents or our caregivers, and then to others later in life. And that's a critical part of what it means to be human as well. We're not solitary creatures. We are creatures that learn and thrive through attachment and through cooperation. I think that last point I'm referring to something we haven't got to yet, but the ways in which humans acquire their food, the way that they go about that, will eventually shape them as well, right? So they will learn to forage and to gather. They'll learn to hunt. They'll start to farm, and those things will influence cultural development as well. I think that's what I meant by the last one. That makes sense so far? You look tired, Baha. Yeah. Okay. I have some reading for you to do, but maybe we'll take a break first, and then we'll come back and read, okay? So take a break, come back, and then I have a bit of work for you to do. All right. So we're talking a little bit about human evolution and kind of where we come from and how we've evolved. And again, it's a fascinating story. There's a lot of stuff in it, and we don't have time to dig into it to a great degree. But I do want to just have us have a little bit of background about where humans come from and where human culture comes from, okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do is read from our textbook, and as I mentioned, our textbook is in Microsoft Teams under Files. So if you go to the, where is it? If you go here to the Comparative Cultures team, you will see no, that's not where I want to be. Yeah, if you go to Microsoft Teams, you'll see a little section called Files there. And all you want to do is, of course, click on it. And then you'll see the textbook in this file folder. And there it is. And so I just want you to read a short section from the textbook here. Yeah, pages 1 to 9, and then answer some questions. And I'm not sure if that's too much to read or not, but let's just see how it goes. This is the first time we've read the textbook, so it's a bit of an experiment, okay? So a few pages, or a few pages to read, and then a few questions to answer.
So it's under files, right?
It's under Files.
I can't reach it.
You can't see it? Like, can you see the files, or like what do you see? Okay. Yeah, so I can put this back up if it helps. Yeah, so what do you see there, Baha?
Yeah.
You got it? Okay. Is everybody okay? Did everyone find it? Okay. All right, so I'll give you some time. We'll read it, and then we'll see what we've discovered. 1 to 9, please. I'll just put that back on the screen here. Okay, good. Good.
Page 1 to 4 is kind of free.
Okay, let me just have a quick look here, okay? Hang on.
If you start from 1.5,
Let's see here.
you will be finishing
2. Yeah, let's start from 1.5. No, hang on. Let's start from page 1. I said 1 to 9, so I'm going to try and trust myself. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. Yeah. Is that okay?
How much time do you have?
How much time do we have?
Yeah.
Let's start reading and see how it goes. But maybe what I'll do is I'll put some time on the clock here. Maybe I'll put 12 minutes on the clock and see how that goes. Maybe just a few more minutes. Would that be okay? 2 more minutes, 3 more minutes? Okay, so hopefully we're done, or we're close to done anyway. But there's a lot of information there, but I wanted to kind of have that as just a background for where we come from and how we wind up having human beings running all around the planet, which is, of course, where we are now. But they start off quite early with the origins of bipedalism and why these bipedal primates start walking on 2 feet anyway. And what did they say? Why might it have been useful for primates to walk on 2 feet? Sorry, what?
Like to see more, to see fences around the area.
Sure, that might have been, that's one of the things that scholars debate, right? It might have been useful for animals to be able to stand up on their back feet and be able to look around for predators, right? Especially if you're a small hominid and you don't really have any way to defend yourself. The sooner you see those lions coming, the better, right? You can run away or climb a tree. Sorry, Baha, what did you say?
Use the other 2 hands.
The other what? Oh, yeah.
The 2 hands.
Yeah, so eventually having these hands free is going to be very useful, right? They're going to be able to manipulate things and make tools. So that's going to be useful for them as well. What else did they mention? What's that? Um,
The spine is attached to the base of the skull so they can support a heavier brain. That's what I read some time ago.
I'm not sure that I've ever read that, although it might be the case. I do know that the process of taking a spine or a vertebral column from horizontal to vertical required a lot of evolutionary change. And so every part of our vertebral column has, been modified. The place where our sort of spinal cord nerves enter the brain, that location has changed, and there's been a massive kind of redesign of our body plan going from 4 legs to 2. I think that I'm not so sure about that. But I don't know. That I've never read. But but certainly, I don't know that we would have developed the brains that we have on 4 feet. I think it was required that the bipedalism came first, and that allowed other things to happen, for sure. What else? What else did they mention? Well, the question was, what were some of the factors that led to hominid bipedalism? Why might these things have started to walk on 2 feet?
Was it like to get farther than they were, like to travel?
Could be. One of the earlier theories was that that climate change was involved, and so places that were kind of heavily forested eventually turned into open grasslands, and you had to walk to find food. And walking on 2 feet, they didn't mention this, walking on 2 feet is actually a very energy efficient way to get around, right? Because if you think about it, and you can try this after, when you walk, you lift up one leg, and then you kind of just fall forward, right? You just kind of use gravity to pull you forward. And then the same thing, you move another leg out, and then you just kind of fall forward. And so because you're kind of using gravity that way, it's a very efficient way to get around. If you think about a 4-legged animal like one of your dogs, if the dog lifts up a leg, does he move? No, right? He can't. He has to almost pull themselves along. It's a different way of getting around, and it makes them very fast, right? Dogs are infinitely faster than humans, but they're not quite as energy efficient as we are. We can travel a long, long distance in a very energy efficient way. Dogs and 4-legged animals aren't really built for that. They're built for speed. And of course, because of that, they're much faster than us, but not as efficient as us. So yeah, it was much easier for those animals to walk long distances to find food if they had to do it. And they probably did. What else? Anything else on this one? The let's see. Adaptation to the environment.
Like the one who moved up north and lived.
Oh, yeah. So they certainly after hominids became bipedal, there was lots of other adaptations that occurred, right, in their brains, their bodies, their hands, and kind of allowed them to live in different climates, right? Yeah, I would say that. Specifically, number 2, specifically, how did the climate affect hominid development?
Sea level.
What's that?
Sea level.
Yeah, so climate change creates sea level change as well. And what did that do?
When the ice melted, glaciation.
Either one.
Just ice.
Yeah, so we've had climate changes, we've had climate fluctuating over time, right? And so it's been really cold, it's been really warm, sea levels have changed, we've had glaciation happening.
Also, that lets them to move into more lands where the ice is melting and the water level is rising.
Mhm.
So it took over their lands.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think that over these thousands and thousands of years that climate change has kind of pushed humans into different areas, right? If it gets too warm, they move out, or if it's too cold, they might move out, or they might move into another environment, or they might be following animals that are moving into a new environment. And then sea levels drop, and so maybe they can reach areas that they weren't able to reach before. There's all these changes that are happening to the planet itself, and that's allowing, and that's kind of, just gently pushing humans in one direction or another, right? And of course, they need space as well, so they might want to get away from other humans. And yeah, so climate's a big climate's a big factor in terms of human migration, but also human development, right? Particularly because every new environment, if you think about it, every new environment is going to require some different technologies, right? So if you're used to, running around Vancouver and, hunting and gathering in Vancouver area, and then you go up, into the mountains in the north, you're going to need a different set of skills, right? You're going to need to design different clothing, maybe different shelters. You're going to need to find different food. It's a different way of life, right? So every new environment that humans encounter requires new technology, new strategies, right? So we've been kind of very positively affected, I think, by the fact that we've been challenged in so many different environments that most animals can't live in the number of environments that we do, right? Not a single species anyway. Why do you think that humans, Homo sapiens, expanded out of Africa?
Did not like get the whole idea by, let's say, like the temperature rising.
Could be, right? So temperature and climate changes could have allowed them to move or encouraged them to move. What else?
You used to go to easier places to adapt.
Yeah, so the humans that we're talking about here are all hunter-gatherers, right? So they hunt and gather food, and so they're going to follow the food, right? If there's no food in a certain area, they're going to leave, right? And again, humans in this period are very mobile, so there's no villages or towns or cities or anything like that. So people move quite a bit, and again, if the food's not there, they move on to a place where the food is, right? So climate could have had something to do with it. Animal populations and if they were rising or falling, or if the animals were migrating, humans would follow them. Yeah, and maybe it just represented a new place where there weren't any humans, right? Because if you're if you're living next to humans, you're competing with them for food, right? And so you might want to get a little more distance so that you don't compete with them, and you find it easier to find your own food, right? So people probably, as their populations continue to rise, they needed more and more space, right? And so they continually looked for new places to expand where they could find food without having to compete with others, right? Oh, and the last part. How and when did Homo sapiens populate the Americas? North and South America. So let's start with when. About 12,000 years ago. And there are a few. There's some different estimates for this, probably, or basically because there's not a huge amount of evidence, but yeah, it seems maybe 12, maybe 14,000 years ago, humans start to populate North America and then South America. And why didn't they get here earlier?
They would get lost.
Well, they certainly didn't know where they were going. I mean, there were no maps of the world, so nobody really knew what the world looked like or how big it was or where anything was.
To trade boats.
Well, for some places, like I think Australia and New Guinea, they do mention that those places were never connected, and so humans would have had to invent boats and sail. So for New Guinea and Australia, they were peopled, they were settled by people who had boats. But for North and South America, it was a bit of a different situation because of glaciation. So by the time humans had kind of made their way into what's now kind of northeastern Russia, all of what we know of as like Alaska and Northwest Territories, that was all frozen. That was all covered in glaciers. And so you couldn't actually get into North America. So prior to that, there's actually no humans in North America at all, really. But because of climate change and sea level change, there's a moment in time where the ice has melted, but the sea level hasn't come all the way up yet. And so northeastern Russia and Alaska are still connected. And the land between them they call Beringia, which of course doesn't exist anymore because it's underwater. But in the past it was called Beringia. And so you could just walk right across, and people began to kind of migrate into that area of the world and eventually into what's now Canada and into the US and all the way down to South America. And so the indigenous people that we kind of talk about and refer to now, we also call them the first peoples because they are the descendants of those people 12,000 years ago that migrated into North and South America. So they literally are the first people here. Yeah, okay, cool. Oh yeah, okay, we'll talk about that tomorrow. All right, so I think that's enough for today. I'm going to leave it there. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about prehistory, and then we'll go on to something else, but I forget what it is. But I'll remember by tomorrow. So that is all, my friends. I'll let you pack it up. Good work today, and we will see you tomorrow.